He put on his uniform, grabbed the girl, and took her right out of the school. Everyone believed he was a cop. Everyone except one woman. Find out what Ronda Rousey did when she realized what was going on. Subscribe to the channel and write in the comments where you're watching this video from. The morning unfolded like countless others across the sprawling suburbs of Southern California. Sunlight spilled lazily over the sleek lines of parked cars, glinting off chrome and polished windshields in the vast parking lot of Westbrook Plaza. Inside the buzzing heart of the shopping center, crowds moved with the casual rhythm of Saturday routines, families browsing through storefronts, teenagers giggling in food courts, and parents corralling their kids with half-finished lattes in hand. The air was filled with a mixture of synthetic mall fragrance and the distant sweet aroma of pretzels and roasted almonds from a nearby kiosk. Among the flow of ordinary people were 6-year-old Lily Martin and her grandmother, Patricia. Lily was the embodiment of youthful joy, her dark blonde hair tied into 2 bouncing pigtails with purple ribbons, and her light-up sneakers blinking with every skip. Clutching her grandmother's hand, she hummed quietly, her gaze darting between a storefront filled with stuffed animals and a fountain where other children tossed pennies. Patricia, in her late 60s but still sharp in mind and movement, had promised Lily a surprise after they picked up the birthday card for her mother. It was a simple errand, the kind one doesn't think twice about. Routine. Safe. As they walked toward the stationery store, Patricia's phone buzzed insistently. She sighed, recognizing her doctor's number, likely a follow-up to her recent blood tests. "Just a moment, sweetheart," she said gently, letting go of Lily's hand for a second to answer. She stepped aside, turning away slightly to hear better over the chatter around them. Lily, momentarily untethered, stood quietly near the entrance of the toy store, watching a display of plush unicorns rotate on a slow-moving platform. That was when he appeared. A man in a crisp navy uniform approached with confident strides. He wore the outfit of a police officer, badge pinned neatly to his chest, utility belt secured, even a name tag that read Officer Reynolds. His face was clean-shaven, his hair tucked under a cap, and his expression pleasant, almost reassuring. His appearance commanded trust, and yet something about his eyes, too flat, too cold, betrayed a lack of warmth. "Hello there," he said softly, crouching to Lily's level. "Your name is Lily, right?" Lily blinked at him, nodding slowly. "Yes," she replied, her voice small. "I'm Officer Reynolds," he continued, gesturing casually to his badge. "Your mommy was in a little accident. She's okay, but she asked me to come get you. She couldn't reach your grandma, so I'm taking you to her." The words were calm, gentle, rehearsed. Lily froze, her heart fluttering with confusion. She didn't know this man, but he spoke with such assurance, like a teacher or a neighbor. She looked over her shoulder, searching for her grandmother, but Patricia had stepped behind a pillar for privacy and was momentarily out of view. The man extended a hand, palm up. "She's waiting, honey. We don't have much time." Lily hesitated. The lessons her parents taught her came rushing back. Don't talk to strangers. Stay where people can see you. But this man wasn't a stranger. He was a policeman, and if something happened to Mommy... Tears welled in her eyes. She didn't want to leave, but she was afraid not to. Slowly, she reached out and took his hand. They walked past the storefronts, weaving through the crowd. Lily tried to glance back again, but the man urged her forward. "You're being very brave," he said with a false smile, gripping her hand tighter. In less than 30 seconds, they disappeared into the flow of the plaza. Back by the fountain, Patricia ended her call, a frown on her face. It hadn't been anything serious, just a routine update, but when she turned around, Lily was gone. Her heart jumped to her throat. She called out once, twice. She scanned the crowd, eyes darting wildly from one stranger to another. No pigtails, no blinking shoes. Panic gripped her chest like a vice. Nearby, a security guard heard her shouts and rushed over. Within minutes, the mall's loudspeakers echoed with a missing child alert, and employees began scanning footage. But the man had timed it perfectly. Surveillance showed him turning a blind corner with Lily just before the alert sounded. He knew what he was doing. In a secluded section of the parking garage, a white unmarked van sat idling, its side doors already slightly open. The man walked briskly now, glancing over his shoulder. He kept a firm grip on Lily, who began to resist, her voice rising. "Where's my mommy? I want Grandma." "Quiet," he hissed. "She'll meet us soon." Lily's voice cracked into sobs. She dug her heels in, pulling away. That was when he dropped the act. Without warning, he scooped her up roughly, ignoring her kicking legs and screams. His voice changed too, gruffer, harder, like a completely different man. "Be quiet now." To any distant observer, it might have seemed like a child having a tantrum in her father's arms. He was banking on that illusion. He always did. No one stopped him as he reached the van, shoved the child inside, and slid the door shut. Across the plaza, inside a sporting goods store, a woman with broad shoulders and a focused expression scanned shelves of protein supplements. Ronda Rousey was off duty, wearing a plain hoodie, jeans, and trainers. She rarely liked crowds, but her nephew's birthday was next week, and she had promised to help pick out a pair of boxing gloves. As she turned toward the entrance, her attention was drawn to a familiar sound: children screaming. Not in excitement, in fear. She stepped out onto the walkway just in time to see a man in a police uniform carrying a sobbing girl toward the lower parking level. Her brow furrowed. Something didn't sit right. The girl didn't look injured. She wasn't clinging to the man, she was fighting him. Ronda's instincts kicked in like muscle memory, the body language, the desperation in the girl's cries. It was wrong. Her steps quickened, eyes narrowing. She followed. The parking garage swallowed her in shadow. She moved silently, keeping her distance, watching as the man yanked open the side door of a white van and shoved the girl inside. Ronda's hand slid into her hoodie pocket, fingers brushing over her phone. She tapped 911 without looking, whispering details as she crept closer. Her voice was calm, but her blood was boiling. She wasn't just watching a kidnapping. She was watching a predator at work. And he had no idea who had just stepped into his path. The van's engine started, headlights flashing. Ronda broke into a run. She was no longer shopping. She was hunting. As she raced toward the van, the driver's side door opened, and the man stepped out, gun already drawn. He pointed it at her. "Back off," he shouted. "This is police business. This is my daughter." But it was too late. Ronda had seen his face, and she wasn't going anywhere. What unfolded next would shake the city, ignite a media storm, and rip open the truth behind a string of unsolved disappearances. But in that moment, under the low ceiling of a concrete garage, it was just one woman against a monster. And she was ready. Ronda never needed a badge to do the right thing. She needed only a reason. And now she had one. The moment froze in Ronda's mind like a sharp photograph, blurred edges, but a vivid, focused center. The barrel of the gun pointed at her face, the thin sheen of sweat on the fake officer's brow, the girl's terrified sobs muffled behind the van's closed door. It was all there, encoded in her body as adrenaline surged. She didn't blink. She didn't flinch. She had trained for this moment her entire life, though not in a ring, not in the octagon, but in a world where the real fight wasn't for medals, but for people, for right and wrong. The man's hands trembled slightly, and Ronda saw it. Not a cop, not a soldier, a man playing dress-up with a stolen costume and a shaking trigger finger. That alone gave her the edge she needed. But she didn't move yet, not while the muzzle was aimed directly between her eyes. "Step away," the man barked, his voice cracking with false authority. "This isn't your business." Ronda raised her hand slowly, but not in surrender. It was the universal gesture of calm. Her eyes never left his. She took a slow breath and tilted her head slightly to the side, as if studying him. "She's not your daughter," Ronda said quietly, her voice even, controlled. "And you're not a cop." He twitched. The gun dipped a half-inch, almost imperceptible. He didn't respond right away, and the silence between them thickened with tension. In the distance, a siren wailed faintly. Ronda wasn't sure if it was coming closer or moving away, but she hoped the 911 dispatcher had taken her whisper seriously. "I said, step away," he snapped again. "You have no idea what's going on." "You're right," Ronda answered, inching her foot slightly forward, imperceptibly shifting her weight. "I don't." "So why don't you tell me what your badge number is?" That did it. His expression cracked just for a second. Panic, fury, calculation all fighting for dominance in his eyes. He lunged forward, as if to shove her aside, but Ronda had already moved. Her body reacted before thought. She twisted to the side, swept his arm down, and struck the inside of his wrist with the edge of her hand. The gun clattered to the ground. He reached for it in a scramble, but Ronda drove her knee into his chest, knocking him backward. The force of her movement wasn't flashy. It was precise, lethal, clean. He hit the concrete floor with a grunt, but he wasn't done yet. He snarled, twisting onto his side, swinging wildly. She dodged easily, grabbed his arm, and wrenched it behind his back with calculated force. The crack of tendons and his yell echoed through the parking structure. People began to appear, curious onlookers drawn by the noise. Phones were already out recording. One man called out that he'd alerted security. Another shouted to stay back, but Ronda didn't hear them. Her focus was absolute. She pinned the man's arm behind his back with one hand and planted her knee between his shoulder blades. "Open the van," she called out to a security guard approaching at a run. The guard hesitated, then obeyed. Inside the van, curled up on the floor behind the passenger seat, was Lily. Her face was red and wet with tears, her hair disheveled. When she saw Ronda's face, she bolted from the vehicle and ran straight to her, flinging her arms around the woman's waist. "He said he was a policeman," she sobbed. "He said my mom was hurt." Ronda's hand gently smoothed the girl's hair, her other still pressing the man's head to the concrete. "I know," she murmured. "You're safe now. He's not going to hurt you." It wasn't long before real officers arrived, sirens blazing, tires screeching as black and white cruisers converged on the parking lot. 2 officers jumped out, weapons drawn. Ronda slowly raised her hands, nodding toward the man beneath her. "He had a weapon," she said. "He grabbed this child under false pretenses. I disarmed and restrained him." The officers scanned the scene. The van, the girl clutching Ronda, the gun lying several feet away, and the man cursing under his breath. They moved fast. The man was cuffed, read his rights, and hauled to his feet. Lily was taken aside by one of the female officers who crouched to speak softly to her, taking her name, her parents' details, gently coaxing her through her fear. Another officer approached Ronda. "Are you okay?" he asked. Ronda gave a half nod. "Fine. Shaken more than anything. He was trying to take her. He had a badge, a gun, the whole getup, but it didn't feel right." The officer studied her face. "You, Ronda Rousey?" She sighed. "Yeah." He exhaled almost with relief. "Well, thank God for that." Statements were taken on the scene. Witnesses confirmed everything: how the man had led the crying girl away, how he'd drawn a weapon on Ronda, how she had disabled him with terrifying efficiency. A couple of teens who had filmed the entire encounter handed over their footage to police. Back in the station, the process began. The suspect's uniform was confiscated. His fake credentials were examined. Painstakingly accurate copies, but fakes all the same. The gun was a modified airsoft pistol with enough realism to pass at a glance. The van was registered under a shell name. Everything about him screamed premeditation. Ronda sat in a fluorescent-lit room filling out paperwork. A bottle of water sat untouched in front of her. She wasn't exhausted physically, but her mind was still playing the scene over and over. The way Lily's body had gone limp with relief when she was freed. The way that man had spoken with the confidence of someone who had done this before. She was certain of it. Later that afternoon, as the story spread through social media and local news, the details became clearer. The suspect's fingerprints matched a known alias. He had served time for abduction, been released 2 years earlier on a technicality. Multiple children had gone missing in different states, cases never connected until now. Ronda watched the news reports at home that night in silence. She didn't speak when her phone buzzed repeatedly with messages from friends, family, and reporters. She didn't respond when a network requested a live interview. She didn't want a spotlight. What she wanted was a world where a man couldn't dress like a cop, lie to a child, and walk away with her in plain sight. She thought about Lily, about the terror in her voice, the way she'd clung to her. That night, Ronda didn't sleep. She didn't know it yet, but this wasn't over, not even close. Tomorrow, the full weight of what had almost happened would hit the city like a tidal wave, but for now it rested on Ronda's shoulders, the quiet awareness that something evil had been stopped, not by a badge, not by protocol, but by the unshakable instinct of someone who refused to stand by and do nothing. And that instinct, she knew, had just saved a life. Morning broke over the city with the same indifference it always did. The sun rising into a clear blue sky above sirens, early traffic, and the first whispers of a story that had not yet fully unfolded. For the Martin family, however, the daylight revealed the gaping wound of a night they would never forget. The police had returned Lily to her mother, Rebecca, shortly after midnight, and the hours since had been a blur of sobs, hugs, and disbelief. Lily had fallen asleep clutched tightly in her mother's arms, her small body trembling long after the danger had passed. Rebecca sat now on the couch, hair unbrushed, still wearing yesterday's clothes, her arms encircling her daughter as if loosening them might cause her to disappear again. Her phone buzzed nonstop on the coffee table. Calls from family, messages from friends, requests from news stations she didn't even know existed. She ignored them all. None of it mattered. The only thing that did was the warm, living weight of her child still breathing against her chest. Down at the precinct, the scene was anything but calm. Detectives were now piecing together a case that grew darker by the hour. The man who had taken Lily, who had nearly driven away with her in broad daylight, in full view of dozens of people, had not yet said a word. He sat in an interrogation room with hands cuffed to the table, his uniform peeled away, replaced with an orange jumpsuit that offered no illusions of legitimacy. He hadn't asked for a lawyer. He hadn't asked for anything. The officer in charge of the investigation, Detective Marcus Ellison, had seen his share of predators, but there was something especially cold about this one. The man's eyes were empty. Without remorse, without even the usual bravado or delusion Ellison often encountered in suspects who committed crimes against children. There was just silence, as if he was already living in a different place entirely, removed from consequence or reality. They had fingerprinted him, run the prints through every available database, and within hours, confirmation arrived. His real name was Randall Dean Cray. Age, 47. Prior conviction for child endangerment. Released 5 years ago after serving a fraction of a sentence due to procedural errors in his arrest. Since then, he had vanished from the system, living under a series of aliases, working low-level jobs, occasionally using stolen identities. He had slipped through the cracks like so many others, blending into a world that made it too easy for monsters to wear masks. Ronda Rousey arrived at the station later that morning, having finally slept for a few hours after giving her full statement the night before. The press was already camped outside, and the moment she stepped out of her car, a sea of flashing cameras and shouted questions surrounded her. She ignored them all, pulling her hood low over her face as she walked calmly through the precinct doors. Inside, she was met by Ellison, who extended a hand with more gratitude than formality. "I don't think we can thank you enough," he said. "You stopped something that could have gone very differently." Rhonda shook her head. "Don't thank me. Just make sure he never gets another chance. We're working on it." Ellison walked her through the latest developments, the identity of Cray, the van, the fake credentials, the surveillance footage. Everything matched her instinct. The man had planned the abduction meticulously. He had cased the shopping center for weeks, waiting for the right child at the right moment. He had chosen Lily because of a pattern. Her visits with her grandmother were regular, predictable, and unguarded. He'd watched them for at least a month. He had done it before. When Ellison showed her the photos of 2 other missing girls from nearby counties, both taken in similar circumstances, both still unaccounted for, Rhonda felt her chest tighten. "Are you saying this was part of a pattern?" she asked. "We can't confirm it yet, but the similarities are hard to ignore. Same profile, same method, and now with the surveillance footage we have of him from other locations, it's starting to look like this guy didn't just get lucky." A sick, heavy silence settled between them. Rhonda clenched her fists. She had only known Lily for a few terrifying moments, but the thought of other little girls who had cried the same way, reached out the same way, and weren't saved, it made her stomach churn. She asked to see him. Ellison hesitated but relented. He knew her background. He knew her reputation. If anyone could look evil in the face and stay steady, it was her. Rhonda stood outside the one-way glass staring at Randall Cray through the reflective surface. He sat utterly still, his eyes fixed on some point in the corner of the room. There was no defiance in his posture, no fear, just the chilling calm of a man who believed the world owed him something and was now merely biding his time. "He hasn't spoken?" she asked. Not a word. Rhonda studied him for a moment longer, then turned away. "He will," she said. "They always do when they realize they're not in control anymore." Back at the Martin home, the family began the process of recovery, though no one quite knew what that meant. Lily clung to her mother constantly, refusing to sleep in her own bed. She didn't want to be alone in any room, didn't want to go near the door or the windows. When her father arrived from a business trip out of state, He held his daughter for over an hour, tears streaming down his face as he apologized over and over again for not being there. Rebecca tried to explain what had happened to Lily in terms that wouldn't frighten her more, but the girl understood enough. She knew she had been lied to, taken, and almost driven away. And she knew, most importantly, that a woman with strong arms and kind eyes had saved her. "Is the bad man gone?" she asked repeatedly. "Yes, baby," Rebecca whispered each time. "He's gone. He can't get you anymore." But even as she said it, Rebecca wasn't sure she believed it. The next few days were a whirlwind. News of the attempted abduction exploded across media channels. Ronda's name trended worldwide. Interviews she declined were conducted anyway, using old footage, speculation, praise from fans and critics alike. Debates raged about how someone like Randall Cray could operate in plain sight for so long, how a person could don a uniform and gain instant access to a child without anyone questioning it. Parents across the country watched the footage with horror, wondering if they'd recognize a fake if they saw one. The footage, captured by witnesses, was clear. Cray dragging the girl, Ronda approaching with calm precision. The moment she struck, the moment she disarmed him, the moment Lily ran to her. It became an image etched in the public consciousness, a symbol of what it meant to intervene. Ronda refused every request for an interview. She had no interest in fame. She hadn't stepped in because of who she was. She had stepped in because no one else did, because it was the right thing to do, because sometimes the only thing standing between a child and tragedy was one person who wouldn't look away. Still, the weight of what could have been haunted her. She went over the moment again and again. What if she had ignored her instinct? What if she had been 5 minutes later? What if the van had pulled away before she could reach it? She knew the answer, and she didn't sleep well because of it. The police continued to build their case. With Rhonda's testimony, the eyewitness footage, the fake documents, and the identification of Cray, the foundation was solid. But they wanted more. They wanted connections to the other missing girls. They wanted to know if someone else had helped him. The van had been recently cleaned. The license plates were fake. He had gone to great lengths to avoid being caught, and yet he had slipped because of Lily's resistance, because of Rhonda's instinct, because of a moment where someone said no. It wasn't over. There was still work to be done. But for the first time in years, Randall Cray was in custody. And thanks to one woman who refused to look the other way, at least one child was safe. Ronda returned to the mall days later, not to shop or to relive the moment, but because she needed to see it again. The fountain, the toy store, the parking garage. She walked through it all in silence, remembering every detail. When she reached the spot where she had first seen Lily, she stood there for a long time. Then she turned and walked away. This time, there was no danger, but she knew there would be others, and when they came, she hoped someone, anyone, would do what needed to be done. In the days that followed the thwarted abduction, the city was gripped by an uneasy combination of relief and horror. Relief, because a child had been saved in time. Horror, because that child had been seconds from disappearing forever, and no one, not the security team at the shopping plaza, not the witnesses in the crowd, not even the police, had seen it coming. The one person who had acted wasn't wearing a badge. She hadn't needed to, and now her name was on every news channel and social media platform in the country. Ronda Rousey didn't return home immediately after visiting the scene. Instead, she drove without direction for hours, letting her thoughts move faster than the car. She kept seeing Lily's face, the tear tracks on her cheeks, the way her arms had wrapped around her with desperate trust. And she kept seeing the other faces, the ones she hadn't met, the ones still missing. Girls with names she didn't know, taken by someone just like Randall Cray, or maybe even by Cray himself. She couldn't escape the knowledge that Lily had been lucky. It shouldn't have come down to luck. That evening, she turned on the television for the first time since the incident. It was the lead story on every network. Grainy phone footage played over and over again. Her figure darting across the parking lot, the confrontation, the disarm, the moment the girl clung to her. Each broadcast layered it with breathless commentary, heroic adjectives, studio interviews with criminologists and child safety experts. They replayed the scene so many times, Ronda barely recognized herself anymore. What disturbed her most wasn't the attention. It was the way the story had begun to reshape itself. She was being cast as the center. Ronda Rousey saves child from armed abductor, as if the girl had become a footnote, as if the failure of everyone else was erased because someone famous had done what they wouldn't. At the precinct, Detective Ellison had been working through a backlog of missing persons reports. Every time a child vanished under suspicious circumstances, law enforcement had only so much time and so many leads before the trail went cold. It was one thing to say no stone would go unturned. It was another thing to face a reality where the stones numbered in the thousands. But the Cray case had given them a breakthrough. Along with Rhonda's eyewitness account, the forensic team had begun to recover information from a hidden drive found in the van. The files were encrypted, but the tech unit had already cracked parts of it. Names, photos, surveillance images of children in different states, taken with telephoto lenses, often from behind fences or through car windows. Dozens of them. One folder contained what looked like detailed scouting notes, routine schedules, parents' work hours, school pickup times, clothing preferences, extracurriculars. Ronda was called back to the station to view the files. Her stomach turned as each image flickered across the screen. The thoroughness chilled her more than anything else. This wasn't the work of a madman operating on impulse. It was the work of a hunter, methodical, controlled, patient, and for every girl saved, there were others unaccounted for. "How long has he been doing this?" she asked. Ellison sat with his arms crossed, his expression grim. "At least 5 years, maybe longer. Why wasn't he caught before?" He knew how to stay invisible. Fake IDs, burner phones, minimal contact with people. He never took from the same area twice, and when he did, it was always in plain sight. The worst part was that the police had only connected the dots after he'd failed. It had taken one girl's resistance and one woman's intervention to uncover what entire departments hadn't. Later that day, the department called a press conference. The community needed reassurance, and the chief of police stood before rows of flashing cameras, delivering carefully chosen words about safety, vigilance, and the bravery of citizens like Ronda Rousey. He confirmed that Randall Cray was in custody and being charged with kidnapping, impersonating an officer, and unlawful possession of a firearm. But what the public wasn't told, at least not yet, was that Cray might have abducted other children who had never come home. Ronda stood to the side of the press area, out of sight. She had declined to speak, but the chief mentioned her name twice, both times with emphasis. She hated how it sounded, as if this was a story about her. That night, social media erupted again. People began sharing their own stories of suspicious encounters, men who claimed to be authority figures, who asked about children, who lingered near schools. Some of the accounts were likely paranoid, fueled by fear. but some felt real. Too real. Police tip lines were flooded. At the Martin home, Lily was recovering slowly. Her parents had taken leave from work and removed her from school for the time being. A therapist visited the house daily. Lily didn't talk much about the man or the van, but she spoke often of the lady who punched the bad guy, of how she had known just from looking that he was lying. Her innocence hadn't returned, but something like hope had taken root in its place. The knowledge that someone had come for her, that someone had fought. Rebecca Martin reached out to Ronda through the police. She wanted to meet. At first, Ronda declined. She didn't want gratitude, but eventually she relented, feeling that if closure existed for anyone in this mess, it belonged to Lily. They met at a quiet cafe, the police chief arranging the meeting away from press or cameras. Rebecca arrived with Lily, who clung to her mother's side but smiled shyly at Ronda. When Ronda knelt and opened her arms, the girl stepped forward without hesitation. "You're stronger than him," Lily whispered. Ronda smiled softly. "You were stronger than him. You never gave up." They sat for nearly an hour, talking in gentle, careful words. Rebecca cried once, not out of grief but out of relief that her daughter was still here to cry for. Before they left, Lily handed Ronda a drawing, her version of the moment they had first met. A stick figure with a hoodie, a ponytail, and powerful fists standing between a small child and a scowling figure in black. Ronda folded it and placed it inside her jacket. She wouldn't hang it on a wall or post it online, but she would keep it. And she would remember. Back at the station, Cray finally spoke. It happened without warning. During a routine check-in, he asked to see Detective Ellison. No lawyer, no preamble, just a request. When Ellison entered the room, Cray stared at the table for a long time before saying anything. "I would have gotten away with it," he murmured, "if she hadn't been there." Ellison said nothing. He let the silence stretch. "I picked her because she was small, easy. The grandmother looked distracted. I watched them 4 times before. You know how many kids disappear like that every year?" Still, Ellison said nothing. Cray leaned back, eyes dead. "But then she showed up, Ronda Rousey. I recognized her right away. She wasn't supposed to be there." "What were you planning to do with the girl?" Ellison asked. Cray's lips curled. "Same as the others. They got it all on record, every word, every admission. He didn't mention names, but he gave locations, states, approximate dates, girls who had never been found. In the end, it seemed he had decided that if he couldn't control what happened next, he would at least control the story. The media didn't know the full scope, not yet, but the authorities did, and the FBI had now joined the case, working to cross-reference the files from Cray's van with open cases across the country. What began as one child nearly lost was quickly becoming the key to unraveling a nationwide pattern of predator activity. Ronda didn't celebrate. She watched from afar as the world reacted, as new headlines appeared, as schools updated their safety protocols and parents walked their children to class in person. She knew that systems only changed after someone was hurt, but if this time the change came before another girl vanished, maybe it would be worth it. She received hundreds of letters, emails, gifts. She responded to none of them. Not out of indifference, but because no words could make what happened to Lily, or what nearly happened, any less real. And yet something had shifted. The man who believed he could operate without consequence had finally been seen for what he was. And thanks to one child's courage, one woman's instinct, and a moment that refused to be ignored, the world had begun to see more clearly. It wasn't justice yet, but it was exposure. and sometimes that was where justice began. The week after Randall Cray's arrest passed in a blur of media frenzy, legal maneuvering, and a growing public reckoning with just how fragile the illusion of safety had become. For Rebecca and Lily Martin, life took on a strange duality: normalcy and trauma walking side by side. The house was still the same, their neighborhood unchanged, but the air inside their home was different. Every creak of a floorboard, every knock at the door, every time a car slowed in front of their lawn, Rebecca's body tensed with automatic dread. Lily, though more resilient than most adults could ever hope to be, had begun to ask more questions. Why had the bad man picked her? How did he know her name? Where had he taken the other girls? Would he come back? Rebecca answered as best she could, always ending with the same assurance. He was gone, and he could never hurt her again. But she no longer believed in absolutes. Randall Cray had worn a badge, spoken with authority, and stolen trust as easily as air. The damage he inflicted wasn't just the trauma of his victims, it was the erosion of belief in the structures meant to protect them. And for every child like Lily who was saved, how many others weren't? The police confirmed the unthinkable. At least 4 of the girls in Cray's hidden files matched open missing persons cases, and the FBI suspected more. Across the country, families were now re-examining the day their daughters vanished, wondering if somewhere in the crowd a man in a crisp uniform had watched from a distance. In Westbrook Plaza, changes came swiftly. The mall replaced its private security firm. A new policy required verification procedures for anyone claiming custody of a child not their own. Employees underwent emergency training in identifying signs of duress. Posters with safety instructions were placed at every entrance. But behind these actions was a bitter truth no one wanted to say out loud. No system, no camera, no rule book had stopped Cray. One woman had, and she hadn't done it because it was her job. She had done it because she had seen what others missed. Ronda stayed out of sight. She refused every interview, declined every award, and politely turned down invitations to charity events and public ceremonies. She wasn't interested in becoming a symbol. She hadn't acted to inspire or impress. She had acted because she had to, because no one else was moving. Still, her name remained etched into the narrative. Online, people called her the Shield, the Guardian, the real hero. Parents showed their children her picture. Schools used her name in drills. What would Rhonda do? The city council even passed a resolution honoring her bravery, though she didn't attend the vote. The resolution included funding for community-based child safety programs and grants for families affected by child abduction. It was a small but meaningful shift, policy driven not by bureaucrats, but by a fighter who refused to look away. The Martins, meanwhile, adjusted to their new reality. Rebecca took a leave of absence from her teaching job. Her husband, Michael, began working remotely to stay home with Lily. Therapy sessions became a regular part of their week. Lily, once bubbly and talkative, grew quieter, more cautious. She had stopped sleeping alone. She needed nightlights in every corner, and her parents took turns lying beside her until she drifted off. But she wasn't broken. She played. She laughed. She drew pictures, sometimes of rainbows, sometimes of a woman with strong arms and a serious face standing between her and a shadowy figure. One afternoon, a package arrived at their door. No name, no return address. Inside was a white teddy bear and a small handwritten card. For the bravest girl I've ever met. You saved yourself, and the rest of us just caught up. It wasn't signed, but Rebecca knew who had sent it. Elsewhere in the city, victims of Randall Cray's harassment and manipulation came forward. Not all had been abducted, but many recalled strange encounters. Men who tried to lure their children, phone calls from untraceable numbers, attempts to pose as school officials or government workers. Cray had tested his limits many times before taking Lily. He had been building toward something larger, and now his failure had shattered the mask he wore. The DA's office announced formal charges: attempted kidnapping, impersonating a law enforcement officer, illegal possession of a weapon, child endangerment, and multiple counts of conspiracy. The case would be prosecuted federally, given the interstate implications. His confession, while helpful, didn't absolve the system of its blind spots. It simply confirmed them. At the heart of it all, Ronda remained the reluctant axis around which the story spun. But, as the days passed, she began to realize that her silence, though noble, might be leaving others without guidance. She didn't need fame, but maybe someone did need her voice. Not for glory, but for clarity. She agreed to a single interview, pre-recorded, no studio, no fanfare. Just her, sitting across from a local journalist with a reputation for empathy and restraint. When the segment aired, millions tuned in. She spoke plainly about what she saw that day, about what she felt, about how easy it would have been to do nothing. She didn't recount her own achievements or dramatize the moment. Instead, she asked a question. What if it had been your child and no one stepped in? The simplicity of the message cut through the noise. It wasn't about being strong. It was about being present, being aware, trusting your gut even when it seems impolite or inconvenient. After the interview, a wave of stories flooded social media. Times people had acted when something seemed wrong. Times they hadn't. A movement began, not with hashtags or trends, but with small acts of vigilance. Parents started role-playing safety scenarios with their children. Teenagers discussed boundaries and consent in classrooms. Communities organized watch groups not just for crime prevention, but for compassion. Ronda watched all of it unfold with quiet astonishment. She hadn't meant to spark anything. She hadn't written a speech or held a press conference, but the truth had spoken for itself. Then, 2 weeks after Cray's arrest, a body was found. In a wooded area 3 counties over, police recovered the remains of a young girl, buried shallowly beneath pine needles and soil. DNA testing confirmed the worst. It was one of the missing girls from Cray's files, a 10-year-old named Savannah, gone for nearly a year. Her parents had never stopped searching. Now they had closure, but not peace. Ronda received the news through Ellison. He called her personally, his voice tight. "This won't be the last," he said. "I know." And it wasn't. Over the next month, 3 more sites were identified. 3 more names were crossed from the list. 3 more families received visits no one should ever have to endure. Each discovery brought renewed anger, sorrow, and resolve. Cray, once silent, now cooperated freely, naming locations, methods, even his own rationale, twisted logic built on resentment, delusion, and a lifelong hunger for control. In court documents, he described his victims as weak links, children who wouldn't be missed. He was wrong. Each name was spoken, each photo published, each memory honored. At one of the vigils, a candlelight gathering held at a local park, Rebecca brought Lily. It was her idea. She wanted to light a candle for the other girls. She held her mother's hand tightly, standing in silence as names were read aloud, When Ronda arrived, unnoticed at first in the back of the crowd, Lily turned and found her in the dark. No one said a word, but the child walked across the grass, took her hand, and together they stood beneath the stars. The consequences of Cray's crimes rippled outward in every direction, into the lives of strangers, into the hearts of mothers and fathers, into the practices of schools, police, judges, and lawmakers. The system he had exploited was now exposed, raw and aching with the knowledge of its failures. But in that pain, something else had taken root. Responsibility, not the forced kind born of liability or scandal, but the voluntary kind, of neighbors watching over each other, of parents slowing down to listen, of citizens refusing to walk away. Ronda didn't ask for any of it. But when the mayor's office called and asked if she would attend a private memorial for the victims, she didn't say no. She stood at the back again, arms folded, heart heavy. She didn't speak, but she stayed. After the ceremony, a mother approached her, holding a photo of her daughter. "She wanted to be a fighter," the woman said, her voice shaking. "She used to watch your matches. Said she was going to grow up and be just like you." Ronda took the photo, studied the girl's face, and nodded. "She already was," she said softly. The consequences of that day had changed many lives, but they had also awakened something long overdue: awareness, action, and a silent vow that no child would ever go unseen again. By the time the first day of Randall Cray's trial arrived, the city had moved into a strange and somber rhythm. Life had resumed in ways that only humans, with their extraordinary capacity for adaptation, could manage. Children returned to school. Parents returned to work. The media no longer flooded every broadcast with Lily Martin's photo, and Ronda's name no longer trended hourly. But beneath that surface of routine, a deeper awareness remained. People looked longer when they saw someone in uniform. They listened harder when a child cried in public. They intervened more quickly when something didn't feel right. And they remembered, especially those who had seen, with their own eyes, what nearly slipped away. The courthouse was packed that morning, not just with press and officials, but with parents, advocates, and survivors. It wasn't a celebrity trial. It wasn't a high-profile political case, but it mattered, deeply, universally. It was about what society believed about safety, trust, authority, and the consequences of failing to protect the most vulnerable. Ronda arrived quietly through a back entrance, accompanied by Detective Ellison and a plainclothes officer. She didn't want attention, and yet she couldn't deny her role in the case. The prosecution had asked her to testify, and after long hesitation, she agreed. Not because she wanted to be in that room, not because she wanted to face Cray again, but because she understood what it meant to tell the truth out loud. Randall Cray was brought in wearing a dull gray suit, his hands cuffed discreetly beneath the table. He looked unremarkable. No wild hair, no twitching mannerisms, no visible rage. He could have passed for someone's uncle, a substitute teacher, an accountant. That was what made him dangerous. He looked ordinary. He had used that ordinariness to disguise monstrous intent. He had weaponized it. The prosecution opened with a calm but unflinching narrative, walking the jury through the events of the attempted abduction, Ronda's intervention, the evidence recovered from the van, the encrypted files, the matching photos of missing children. They introduced the timeline of his movements across state lines, showing how his appearances correlated with multiple disappearances. Every detail was documented, every witness carefully prepared. Then came the confession, his own words recorded and transcribed. The courtroom was still as excerpts were read aloud. Cray had admitted to targeting children he believed would be easier to remove. He had monitored routines, studied weaknesses, tested how far he could push the boundaries of public doubt. In one statement, he said, "I didn't steal them. I liberated them from chaos." The jurors sat motionless, their faces tight, pale, focused. Lily did not attend the trial. Her parents had decided early on to keep her away from the courtroom, shielding her from the spectacle. But her presence was felt in every word, every photograph, every silent moment when the air thickened with unspoken grief. Ronda's name came up frequently. Witnesses recalled the scene in the parking garage, described the panic, the bravery, the precision. The footage was played again for the jury, slowed down, frame by frame. They saw the moment she stepped between Cray and the van. They watched her disarm him, restrain him, protect the child. It was no longer a viral clip. It was evidence. When Ronda was called to the stand, a hush fell across the room. She walked with calm purpose, her shoulders square, her gaze steady. She was sworn in, and the questioning began. The prosecutor, a composed woman named Marissa Grant, kept her tone professional but empathetic. She asked Ronda to recount the events of that day, from the moment she noticed something was wrong to the moment Cray was in handcuffs. Ronda answered clearly, without embellishment. She described Lily's distress, Cray's behavior, the way he tried to use authority to push people away. She explained how her instincts, honed over years of training and experience, told her something wasn't right. When asked what might have happened if she hadn't intervened, Ronda paused for the first time. "I believe she would have been gone within seconds," she said, "and no one would have known until it was too late. He had everything prepared. He knew what he was doing." "Why did you get involved?" Marissa asked gently. Ronda's eyes didn't waver. Because she was asking for help, and no one was answering. The courtroom remained silent after her testimony. Even the defense declined to cross-examine her. There was nothing they could ask that wouldn't make them look smaller in comparison. Over the next several days, more witnesses testified. FBI agents detailed the contents of Cray's files: photos, notes, surveillance data. Forensic analysts spoke about the hidden compartments in the van, the specialized restraints found in a secondary storage unit Cray had rented under another false identity. The scope of his operation became clearer, and, with it, the realization that Lily's survival was the exception, not the rule. Families of the missing girls sat in the front row, clutching photographs, dabbing tears. Some were there in the search of closure. Some were there for justice. All of them were there because they refused to let their children become statistics. One by one, the stories were told. Parents described the day their daughters vanished, how normal it had started, how unremarkable everything had seemed until the moment they realized something was wrong. In some cases, there had been no suspects, no leads, just vanished children and shattered lives. Now they had a name. Now they had someone to hold accountable. Cray remained unmoved. He rarely looked up. He offered no apologies. Occasionally, he leaned toward his attorney, whispered something, and returned to staring at his folded hands. The prosecution rested after 2 weeks of overwhelming evidence. The defense, perhaps understanding the futility of its position, focused not on denial but on deflection. Cray's attorney argued mental instability, childhood trauma, a delusional belief system. It was a familiar playbook, and it landed flat. The jury didn't look convinced. Neither did the judge. The final day of testimony brought the most difficult moment of the trial. The prosecution introduced a victim impact statement recorded on video by Savannah's parents, the first confirmed child whose remains had been recovered. They couldn't bring themselves to speak in court, so they spoke through a screen. "We waited every day for her to come home," her mother said. "We left the porch light on for a year. We sang her songs. We kept her room exactly the same. And then they found her in a hole in the ground, like trash." Her father added, "She was 10 years old. She liked puzzles. She wanted to be a veterinarian. He stole all of that. And now we have to live the rest of our lives with that silence." Some jurors cried, some clenched their fists. No one looked away. When the jury was finally given their charge, the weight of the trial settled into the room like fog. Deliberations lasted less than 5 hours. They returned with guilty verdicts on all counts. Every parent, every advocate, every survivor exhaled as if they'd been holding their breath for weeks. Judge Marlowe, a man known for his composed demeanor, addressed Cray with unusual emotion. He spoke not just as a judge, but as a father, a grandfather, a citizen. "You built your life around shadows, Mr. Cray. You used disguise and fear to prey on innocence. You robbed families of their joy, their peace, their futures. And the only reason we know your name today is because a little girl said no, and a woman with more courage than you'll ever understand stood in your way." He sentenced Cray to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. There was no applause, no cheers, just silence. The heavy, enduring silence of justice finally served. After the sentencing, Rebecca Martin approached Ronda in the hallway. She didn't speak. She simply hugged her. It was the kind of hug that said everything without a single word. "Thank you, I'm sorry, I see you." Lily had drawn another picture that morning. This time it showed a courtroom with stick figures sitting on benches. At the center was a figure behind bars, and in the front row, holding hands, were a little girl and a woman with a ponytail. Later that evening, Ronda walked along the beach as the sun dipped low over the horizon. The wind was sharp, the sky bruised with dusk. She thought about Savannah, about the other girls, about Lily and what her life might be now. She thought about the trial, the testimony, the moment she'd looked Cray in the eye and refused to let him look away. She had never wanted to be a witness, but sometimes the truth needed a face, and when it did, she had been there. The tide rolled in, erased the footprints in the sand, and kept moving forward. So would she. The air in the city felt different in the weeks following the verdict. It wasn't celebration. No one danced in the streets or lit fireworks for justice served. But it was quieter in a way that felt meaningful. The tension that had curled into the edges of daily life, at schoolyards, in shopping centers, at crosswalks and bus stops, began to uncoil. It hadn't disappeared entirely, and perhaps it never would, but the wound that Randall Cray had torn open was beginning to scab over. What remained wasn't normalcy, but something stronger, awareness. People looked up more often, listened more intently, checked twice when a child cried or a stranger approached with too much confidence. The city was changed, not in fear, but in purpose. Lily Martin returned to school on a Monday morning in late spring, clutching her mother's hand tightly as they walked through the gate together. She wore a light purple backpack and a necklace made of plastic beads spelling out her name. She was quieter than she had been before everything happened, but not silent. In her classroom, she smiled when her teacher knelt to hug her. She sat next to her old desk. She opened her notebook and began to draw. The other children welcomed her back with the innocent matter-of-factness of youth. They had been told, in soft, safe words, that Lily had gone through something scary but was now okay. Children don't need details to understand pain. They only need to know it has passed. At recess, Lily walked the perimeter of the playground by herself. She didn't join the game of tag, didn't climb the jungle gym, but she watched, observed. She was rebuilding trust in the world, one moment at a time. She stopped at the edge of the field and looked up at the sky. Her mother had told her once that courage wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was the decision to go back into the world even when you were still afraid. That's what Lily was doing now, not pretending nothing had happened, but walking through it anyway. Rebecca waited outside the school gate for the full hour, her heart pounding with every minute Lily was out of sight. It wasn't rational fear, but it was real. She didn't trust the world yet, even if she trusted her daughter's strength. And she wasn't alone. Parents all over the city lingered longer at drop-off and pickup. Volunteers doubled on field trips. Principals met with parents weekly. The shock hadn't faded, but neither had the resolution. Ronda Rousey kept a low profile. After the trial, she withdrew from interviews and public comment again. The image of her sitting in court had circulated widely, shoulders straight, eyes forward, jaw firm. But she wanted no more of it. She had spoken when it mattered. Now it was time to let others carry the momentum. She spent her mornings training again, early runs before dawn when the world was still quiet, and late nights reading books she hadn't had time for during the chaos. She kept her phone on silent most of the day. The messages still poured in. Letters from victims, requests from advocacy groups, questions from law students and journalists. But she responded rarely, and only when she felt she could help without stepping back into the spotlight. She thought often of Lily, of her fierce little voice saying, "That's not my daddy," and the strength it had taken to say it. That one act had been the crack in the crazed disguise. Without it, Ronda might never have noticed him. It wasn't her intervention that saved Lily, it was Lily's refusal to be silent. Ronda had just listened, and that truth haunted her in the best way. It reminded her that strength wasn't always a punch or a takedown. Sometimes it was a voice that refused to be ignored. One afternoon, Ronda received a formal invitation from the mayor's office. A small, private ceremony was being organized to honor the lives of the girls lost and the resilience of the communities they left behind. It would include the families, select law enforcement, school counselors, and victim advocates. Ronda almost declined. She hated ceremonies, but this one wasn't about her. It was about them, about what had been taken and what was now being reclaimed. She wore a simple black blouse and slacks, no makeup, no fanfare. She arrived 15 minutes early and found a seat near the back of the community center, where strings of white lights hung overhead and photos of the missing children adorned a memorial wall. Candles flickered beneath each frame. A long table held dozens of small paper lanterns, each marked with a name. When the Martins arrived, Lily spotted Ronda almost instantly. She walked over slowly, holding her mother's hand. This time she didn't hesitate. She let go, stepped forward, and hugged Ronda tightly around the waist. "I'm not scared anymore," she said softly. "I believe you," Ronda whispered, resting a hand on her shoulder. The ceremony was simple. No podiums, no press, just people speaking honestly. Parents talked about their children, what they had loved, what they had dreamed of becoming. A teacher described how she still left an empty chair in the front row every year for the girls she had lost. A detective who had once doubted his work stood up and read the names of each child aloud. The final part of the evening involved releasing the lanterns. Families carried them to the small lake behind the center, lit them, and let them float out across the water. Lily asked Ronda to release one with her. They stood at the edge of the dock, hands together, the flame between them dancing against the evening wind. When the lantern finally lifted from their fingertips, it drifted slowly out across the water, joining the dozens of others that now dotted the dark surface like stars fallen into reflection. After the ceremony, Ronda stayed behind to help clean up. She didn't say much. She didn't need to. Her presence was enough. As she gathered chairs and folded tablecloths, she noticed Lily talking to another little girl whose sister had been one of Cray's victims. They sat cross-legged on the grass, drawing shapes in the dirt with twigs, whispering like old friends. That night, Ronda drove home without turning on the radio. The silence felt earned. She passed the plaza where it had all begun. Westbrook Plaza, still busy, still loud. She slowed at the traffic light, watching families entering and leaving. Security guards now wore bright neon vests. A new sign near the entrance read, "If you see something, say something. We're all responsible." It wasn't perfect. Nothing ever would be. But it was a start. The following week, Ronda received a package, no return address. Inside was a folded sheet of notebook paper and a photograph. The photo showed Lily standing beside a classroom project, a collage titled My Heroes. There were cutouts of doctors, firefighters, teachers, and in the center a printed image of Ronda, arms crossed, standing beside Lily's drawing of their first meeting. The note said, in messy handwriting, "Thank you for listening. I want to be brave like you when I grow up." Ronda stared at the note for a long time. Then she pinned it to the inside of her closet door, behind her old championship belts and medals. It belonged there, not for display, but for remembrance. Weeks turned to months. Randall Cray began his life sentence in federal prison, his name now synonymous with one of the most horrific child abduction cases in recent memory. He was no longer a threat. But the systems that had allowed him to operate were still being audited, revised, and in some cases dismantled. Lawmakers pushed through new legislation about verification procedures for child pickup at schools, the creation of a national database for child safety alerts, and training for private security firms. It wasn't enough. It never would be, but it was more than nothing. One night in early summer, Ronda stood outside her small home on the edge of town, looking up at the stars. She hadn't returned to the Octagon. She wasn't sure she ever would. But she felt stronger now than she had in years. Not in her muscles, not in her fists, but in her core. In knowing that when the moment came, she had been the person she needed to be. She wasn't a hero. She hadn't saved the world. But she had saved one life. And sometimes that was enough. Inside, her phone buzzed with a new message. Another request for a school visit. Another letter from a parent. She turned it over and placed it screen down on the counter. Tomorrow. She'd answer tomorrow. Tonight, she would rest. Knowing that Lily Martin was asleep in her own bed, in her own house, surrounded by people who loved her. Knowing that a girl who had once screamed for help in a parking lot was now playing tag with classmates and drawing stars in the dirt. Knowing that in a world where evil sometimes wore the face of authority, courage could wear the face of anyone willing to act, and that was how hope was born. Not all at once, but slowly, fiercely, one voice at a time. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more. Check out the next video on the screen and share this one with someone who needs to see it.